Those who have been to a ruined wedding. What happened? I played a wedding where as we started playing the set, everyone ran outside and nobody was to be seen for the rest of the night. I originally assumed it was because nobody liked us, but the bride came in afterwards and said there was a huge fight involving multiple members of both families and everyone basically went home upset, injured or in a police van. We couldn't stop playing since we were paid and it was our job, and the only person watching was the drunk uncle dancing on his own asking for requests we didn't know. The drunk uncle dancing by himself all night sounds like something that would happen at a Sim's wedding. When I was 6 or 7 I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little me, so much sugar everywhere, basically heaven. The reception was in a big community center that was reserved for the occasion. Went to the girls' bathroom, passing by the men's room to see my uncle on the floor, went back to the main room to tell my dad my uncle was looking weird. Well, uncle had a stroke and had died. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying, and everyone except close family left. Bright side is the marriage is still going strong 20 years later, despite what happened that day. My dad and stepmom's wedding was a shit show. For context, her family was terrible on both sides: abusive father, neglectful alcoholic mother, and step-parents who didn't care about her much, and she basically ran to my father to get away from it all when she was 15. Bigger problem was, my dad was 26, also abusive, and just a real duck and shit show of a person. On my father's side of things, he hated his mother and blamed everything wrong in his life on her, as he did to most women in his family, later doing it to my stepmom. So the wedding was doomed to be terrible. It started when my stepmom was walking down the aisle. She'd reconnected with her father in the last year and had recently been in a fight with her stepfather, so it was just her dad walking her. There was a branch in the way outdoor wedding, but he pulled it out of the way for her. As she thanks him, he lets go and flings it back into her face and literally collapses laughing. She awkwardly chuckles, no doubt knowing he is going to get mad at her if she shows she's upset. And the day continues, but she's visibly upset. After the toasts, some people didn't drink the champagne that had been set out. The one thing she had asked of her mom was that she not drink. She was even given sparkling juice rather than champagne. So while stepmom is changing into her reception dress, her mom goes table to table pounding down all of the alcohol she can get her hands on. A cousin of mine who doesn't know what's happening starts chanting chug, 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 and stepmom walks back to her mom downing the last one and denying everything. Cousin slips out the tent once he realizes what's going on and leaves the two alone to argue. Stepmom comes out crying a few minutes later, goes back to her car, and doesn't come back for a good 20 minutes. While all of that is happening, Grandma pulls up and starts cursing out my dad for a ton of shit, including marrying a kid. Stepmom was 25 at this point who she hates, not letting her invite a friend to the wedding, and him owing her a bunch of money. Dad tells her to duck off and she leaves. Then my dad got mad at my stepmom for being gone so long, accused her of either being a baby for crying or of lying and cheating on him. So she sat down on the fringes and tried to not cry and also remain visible to my dad for the next several hours. They may have been dating for 10 years, but the marriage only lasted 6 months. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after a terminal diagnosis, and it was touch and go whether he would be well enough to attend the wedding. In the end he was too unwell to attend despite wishing that he could. Just as we got to the wedding reception, my friend was informed that his father had just passed away. It was devastating. My wife's grandfather slipped downstairs 2 days before our wedding. We got told it was a very bruised ankle, but he couldn't make it. That developed the day after into ongoing hospitalization for observation. We didn't question it. He was 81. We went on honeymoon the day after that. On day 4 of the honeymoon he passed away. Despite asking to be updated, we didn't get told until our return. Turns out the fall down the stairs was real. So was the bruised ankle. It's just that my mother-in-law, it was her dad, deliberately didn't mention the significant internal injuries. Gordon left a good legacy: the wooden chair leg on Henry VIII's statue above the gate to Trinity College in Cambridge. He was one of the students that made it happen. The story in the student newspaper Varsity that a cleaner put it there isn't true. I've catered many weddings, and there have been some memorable ones. Fights between guests, wedding cakes falling over, red wine spilt on wedding dresses, the lot. The one I'll never forget: an all-day do. Small ceremony, a few close friends and family, and a big reception filled with a huge buffet. Every type of food you could imagine and a free bar, all in the same venue. They had booked and paid for 250 evening guests, but 30 guests turned up, at most. My heart broke for this couple. A massive beautiful converted barn, loads of food and drinks, Great music but no guests. At about 10 p.m. the venue was licensed until 11 p.m. The buffet food had barely been touched. The few who were there ate, but it hardly made a dent as it was planned for so many more people. I asked the mother of the bride if she wanted me to cover and refrigerate the untouched food so the new couple could take it home, and her response of "Oh no, there are still a lot of people coming" was the most awkward I've ever felt in my life. No more guests showed. There was a flash of car headlights in the distance about 10:30 p.m. and the bride beamed when she thought it was latecomers arriving. But no, it was just taxis arriving to pick up the few who were there. It's the only event I have ever done where we didn't have to kick people out of the venue. At 11 p.m., the place was empty. In a nutshell, bride's parents paid for the day and the happy couple had zero control over their guest list. Her parents invited all their friends to the evening function, but in reality, it was just associates they wanted to flex on, resulting in no one giving a shit about an invite to a wedding where they didn't know the bride or groom. It was basically just a networking event for the bride's parents. Edit. For those asking, I believe the guests did RSVP, but instead of a handful of guests thinking "duck it, we don't know them, they won't notice we're not there," it was the majority of them. I was best man at my sister-in-law's wedding, stepped in for the brother of the groom. That's another story entirely. For a whole year of planning, all the bride so wanted was a dove release while they said handwritten vows to each other. Very small, non-denominational, most of the family are atheist anyway. Wedding day arrives early summer and something is off with the bird handlers. They show up a bit late and are sourcing help from the wedding party to get everything in line. When the time comes to say their vows, I help the handler carry the chest with the doves in it over to what is to be the altar where the bride and groom are standing. Vows are just about wrapping up and the handler gives me the signal to open the chest. I open it and see 20-30 dead doves in the crate. I immediately close it to try and limit who knows what happened. Too late. The look of horror on her face was all that was needed. We spent the next few hours trying to cheer everyone up, but by the end of the reception the entire wedding party had organized and filed animal cruelty complaints on the handler. It was all anyone could focus on. I used to do catering work, and this one time my boss sent me to a remote location in the woods on a beautiful river. I found out while we were loading the truck that the boss wouldn't be going and that I was essentially in charge. My boss promised that everything was taken care of, set up, etc. So, you can imagine my surprise when I arrived to this remote location and literally nothing was set up. We were only about an hour early, so I frantically started trying to get the tent in order. We needed extension cords to run the coffee and tea, there were none. We needed tables to set up the food, there were none. I somehow whipped up impromptu everything for the missing things, and just as the bride and groom are arriving, we blow the fuse for our only power source and the place is plunged into darkness. We reset the breaker, I move some stuff around, blow the fuse again. This delicate dance went on for the entire evening. Through speeches, first dance, the works. I think the worst part of the entire experience was when we went to rinse our dishes before boxing them up and found out that when we blew the fuses the water pump for the place stopped working and needed to be primed again. At that point I said forget about it, we'll take them back dirty, and the crew and I spent several more hours after the long ride home doing them. That was the day I worked a 15-hour shift without a break and still ruined the wedding. Needless to say, I quit that job. The wedding was at a state park that's famous for its giant gorge waterfall. I don't know whose idea this was, but someone suggested a photo overlooking this gorge and everybody was game. The wedding party went around a stone security barrier and the maid of honor literally fell off the cliff to her death. It was like 500+ feet. Okay, this ties for worst wedding story in this thread. Edited, many more death stories have been posted, so we're up to something like a 20-way tie by now. Attended a wedding reception and was seated near the cameraman. An aunt of mine was sitting closer to the camera and spent the evening commenting and gossiping about everyone, and much of it came out on the video. The cameraman was great. He did 2 copies, one edited and the other no holds barred. The unedited version is the stuff of legend. Was a guest, a friend of the bride. Did not know anyone attending. Very expensive, over-the-top place. Several hundred guests of this very Italian wedding. Maid of honor grabs mic at the ducktail hour, begins her speech. Rambling, drunk, quickly devolves to stating the recently deceased mother of the bride was against this wedding and that's basically what killed her. Plus Vinny will never give up Prosty. She is tackled by several people and dragged away. The happy couple is separated and divorced within a year. I was studying photography and used to act as an assistant to a well-known wedding photographer. Went to a couple's wedding. He shot digital and I shot black and white film. Spent all day with the couple from 9 a.m. through till 2 a.m. the next morning. When we left I could see how genuinely in love they were. It was only a day, but I got to know them quite well and really liked them both. The next morning, I get a call from the photographer and his voice was shaky. He explained that the groom had been murdered that night after the reception party. 3 guys had broken into their bungalow to steal wedding gifts. The groom got out of bed to stop them and they executed him in front of the bride. I was in shock for about 2 weeks. This story was in South Africa, if that helps explain how or why this happened. The next weekend, the photographer and I went to the bride's house to present her with the photos. We'd worked together to get the job massively accelerated so she had the photos of her husband. We did it at our own expense and didn't charge her a penny for the day or all the prints and album, sort of the least we could do. Because my photos didn't matter as much, I'd been able to simply capture those natural moments between them, rather than staged wedding photos. So they had the normal album pics but also about 150 snaps of just them being a couple. She was in tears from the moment we arrived till we left a few hours later. She was a shadow of the women I'd met only a week earlier. That shit still haunts me. Edit: I didn't expect this story to get the attention it has. I am sorry for any upset this has caused anyone reading this, but I believe it's an important reality check. I loved South Africa in a lot of ways, but it's a very troubled place with insane murder and rape rates. My story is by no means unique or even particularly shocking by South African standards. I also have worse stories like this from friends and neighbors. I have CPTSD from my time living there and the things I'd endured. I've got friends who were diagnosed with PTSD stemming from their time there too. Also, for anyone wanting to read the news article about this event link, I hope this dissuades a few people from visiting South Africa, and in doing so perhaps I save a few lives. Groom got so drunk the night before he couldn't make it to the altar at the ceremony. They still had the ceremony with only the bride and her party, plus one of the groomsmen, who apparently didn't get wasted. Everyone there was shaking their heads the entire time. The groom did make one singular appearance for a few seconds at the reception. He looked like a zombie and was wearing street clothes, and this was no trashy wedding. The bride was a professional dancer for a major label pop star, so that gives you an idea of the type of people that were in attendance. 200 plus people at the ceremony alone, probably double that at the reception. They divorced within 6 months. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. While we were waiting, the air conditioning broke in the venue. It was over 100 degrees outside and humid as duck. The place was overcrowded. You could barely move without bumping into someone else, and in the heat that was extra miserable. I guess the air conditioning problem had also affected the refrigeration or something, because most of the food was spoiled. The only food on the buffet was salad, spaghetti and rolls, not enough to feed even half the guests. Most people left after the first dance. 2 of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. When the wedding planner is also crying, you know the day has spiraled out of control. I feel bad for laughing, but man, that's so true. I'd say that's a rare occasion for a wedding planner. Father of the bride died suddenly 3 days before the wedding pre-COVID. Daddy-daughter dance was mom, bride, and picture of dad. Same with walking down the aisle to give her away. Lots of tears, not many smiles. Even the bartender at the hotel knew the night before and was talking about it with me. My wife and I had to postpone our wedding due to COVID. On the day we would have gotten married, my wife's grandfather passed away. I am kind of grateful we couldn't get married on that day. There's no way we could have had a good time with such a loss in the family. It was a big wedding, over 300 people. Turns out the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for a little bit, but waited until the wedding to go table to table, letting everyone know the bride was sleeping with her husband. Poor groom was blindsided. Worst part was his father-in-law was well off and opened up a restaurant for him. Well, he lost his wife and his restaurant. Best friend's mom got remarried and had an expensive, beautiful wedding, but for some reason didn't hire a DJ. Last minute her mom asked me to manage the CD and gave me a list along with verbal instructions of when to play each. I tried to warn her that I simply did not follow, but she told me she had confidence in me. Apparently all her life she wanted to walk down the aisle to some specific song, but I just couldn't figure it out. They had to get walking to match the sunset, so she went ahead down the aisle while I flipped through a series of incorrect songs to the horror amusement of the crowd. For years after, when I called my friend's house and her stepdad answered, he'd say, "Is this the guy who ducked up my wedding? How are ya?" I went to a wedding where the bride and groom bought the wedding package on Groupon, which is fine. Why spend a fortune for one day? But I guess the venue thought they could cut some corners, so they stuck us in a room that smelled so strongly of cat urine some people immediately left. The only drinks were those from a vending machine. It was next to an airport, so every time a plane took off the ceremony had to be paused because you couldn't hear anything. And the day after the event, every single one of us had food poisoning. Edit bonus story because even though it didn't ruin the wedding for the couple, it ruined it for the bridal party. I was a bridesmaid for my friend, flew across the world for over 10 hours to be there, had to do the setup of the venue, assign people to rooms, put signs on doors, finish the seating chart, transport food, redo her bouquet because she didn't like it, etc., etc. The whole time she's rude and tells everyone within earshot that the bridesmaids aren't helping. Her maid of honor was absolutely bending over backwards trying to keep her happy, and instead of being grateful she instead told her sister I should have asked you to be my maid of honor instead. She was pretty cold to me and kept asking if I'd lost weight. I said yes because I had been ill but didn't think much of it. At the reception her new husband takes the opportunity to read the speech she clearly wrote for him to say to me, "We are so glad you fit into your dress," in front of over 100 people. I don't speak to her anymore and neither does her maid of honor or other bridesmaid. This was one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. Bride landed and dislocated her knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee etc. But she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and threw up down her dress, and had to sit with her mum in another room while everyone else danced etc. Felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. Not me, but my elder cousin's story. He attended a wedding where the bride and groom got scammed by the wedding organizer. 1 hour before the wedding event, nothing there in the room. No food, no decorations, just few tables and basically it feels like unused ballroom. The bride and groom realized the wedding organizer scammed them and the wedding organizer took the money to bought themselves a big old house. When the bride and groom decided to see the wedding organizer, they caught him sleeping in his house. It became a national TV news here link and the wedding organizer got sued by few brides and grooms that got scammed by them, too. We attended a wedding for family member who didn't have a lot of money. It was hosted at an inexpensive venue but was nice. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt in the couple's face. They came up to our table and said, "Do you have any friends in city?" We lived an hour away. They had all this food for 100 people but only 30 guests. They were willing to have complete strangers come down just so their money and food wouldn't go to waste. We hadn't handed over our card with cash inside yet, so my husband hit the at the moment and added another 100. Maybe not ruined but it definitely got tense. Started with the best man groom's brother just absolutely roasting the bride and her parents. Basically called them gold diggers and stuff in front of several hundred family and friends. Then they cut the cake, apparently. The groom was told under no uncertain terms not to shove cake in her face. Well, he did it anyway and she stormed off, not to be seen for 20 minutes. Reception went on as planned. She got wasted and I'm told she passed out that night in the middle of the street while still in her wedding dress. Pure class. They're divorced now. I was invited to the reception of one of my good friends. They had been courthouse married for months and living happily. When I arrived at the location and saw the big crowd I knew something was wrong. Friend's wife is prone to panic attacks and is extremely agoraphobic to the point of breaking down and crying if she is overwhelmed. Immediately call friend and ask what's going on and if this was okay. Turns out friend's parents invited everyone possible to be there without my friend knowing. After I sent him a picture of the crowd, him and his wife thought it would be better to go on a second honeymoon than have a reception. He sent a message apologizing to all those his wife and him invited and telling them to leave without telling his parents. Parents had a meltdown as we left. I worked on a tropical island off the coast of Queensland, Australia. Loads of weddings happened there. Most days there'd be one or two. One day this groom's party comes through my bar. They're on the Bucks party thing before the wedding the next day. They're pretty drunk at 4 p.m. I figured they started early and would finish early given they have a sunrise ceremony. Worst idea in the world. For your information, about an hour later they've left and gone to another bar on the island. Then the bride's party comes through, equally shit-faced. I finished work at 9 p.m. then came back 3 hours later to work in the nightclub. I get in at midnight, start pouring drinks. It's busy as duck with like 250 people in the club. Around 1 a.m. the groom and bride parties roll and absolutely destroyed. They look disgustingly drunk. I've no idea why security let them in because I wasn't serving them. They left about 45 minutes later. So, roughly, they'd arrive back at their hotel rooms around 2 a.m. with the expectation that the bride and her party need to be up at 4 a.m. for hair and makeup to be done in time for a 7:15 am ceremony. They all decide we'll just stay up all night and keep drinking until the wedding. At this stage they had to have been drinking for 15-18 hours. Anyway, ceremony time rolls around. She can't walk down the aisle, which is on the beach, in her heels, so she tosses them off. Groom and all their friends are drunk as duck and can barely stand. They try to say their vows but the celebrant can't understand them, so she isn't legally allowed to marry them because they're too drunk to consent to marriage. Whole wedding is canned. A simple wedding, like the one they had. For the wedding party and 20 guests cost $35,000, so they wasted all that money to be told, sorry, you're drunk, I cannot legally marry you. Edit. Being that quite a few people have said this sounds like a fun way to spend your wedding, so what if you didn't get legally married? Just have the reception and sort it out later. They did have the reception. From what I was told, the bride passed out about an hour in. The groom threw up everywhere. The mothers of the bride and groom were hysterically crying and incredibly upset with their kids, but, for the guests who weren't that wasted or crying, they had a great time.